Carolyn Jansen was more than just a name in a case file. She was a mother, a friend, and a woman with a life full of stories, struggles, and dreams. Those who knew her described her as warm and compassionate, someone who always found a way to bring a smile to those around her. She had a soft spot for animals, often taking in stray pets and caring for them as if they were family. Life hadn't always been easy for Carolyn, but she had a good heart, and that was what people remembered most about her. Despite her kindness, Carolyn faced her share of hardships. Financial struggles were a constant battle, and at times she found herself just trying to get by. In the early 2000s, she was working at a Waffle House in Aurora, Colorado, doing her best to make ends meet. It was there that she met J.D. Harrington, a co-worker who, like her, was trying to navigate life's challenges. The two weren't particularly close, but their circumstances led them to a mutual agreement. They would become roommates to split living costs. It was a decision that, at the time, seemed practical, but in reality it placed Carolyn on the path of a man who would ultimately take her life. Carolyn and J.D. moved into an apartment together, trying to keep their finances stable. But things were tense. J.D. had a reputation for having a bad temper, especially when it came to money. He was the kind of man who wouldn't tolerate being crossed, and he made that clear to those around him. Carolyn, on the other hand, was more easygoing, but she was also vulnerable. She was in a difficult place financially and had limited options. Then, one day in early 2002, Carolyn disappeared. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving. She didn't take her belongings. It was as if she had simply vanished. J.D., when asked about it, gave everyone the same story. She had taken off. And worse, she had stolen his rent money before she left. It was a convenient explanation, and for a while people accepted it. But something wasn't right. Carolyn had left behind things that no one would abandon voluntarily: her purse, her social security card, and personal belongings that she would need if she were starting over somewhere new. If she had left town, where had she gone? And why hadn't she contacted anyone? For years, the question remained unanswered. No one knew what had happened to Carolyn Jansen. She was just gone. 3 years later, in 2005, the mystery of Carolyn's disappearance would finally start to unravel. Richard Johnson was an ordinary man living in Aurora. He had nothing to do with Carolyn or J.D., but he had unknowingly been holding on to the key to solving the case for years. On his patio, tucked away among other stored items, was a large plastic container, one that had been left there by an acquaintance long ago. On this particular day, Richard decided to clear out some space and move things around. But when he went to shift the container, a horrible smell hit him. It was a smell unlike anything he had ever encountered. Overcome by the stench, Richard opened the container. Inside, he saw something that made his stomach turn. A body, curled up in a fetal position, skeletal remains pressed against the plastic walls. The sight was horrifying. A bracelet still clung to one wrist. Strands of reddish-brown hair lay tangled among the remains. It didn't take long for Richard to realize who it might be. His mind immediately went to one person: Carolyn Jansen. The police were called to the scene. Officers arrived and were immediately hit by the pungent, unmistakable odor of human decomposition. The container had been sealed shut with layers of duct tape, wrapped so thoroughly that whoever had done it wanted to ensure it was never opened. But after 3 years, nature had taken its course. The smell could no longer be contained. Inside the box was the body of Carolyn Jansen. A forensic examination revealed that she had died from blunt force trauma to the skull. She had been murdered. The investigation into Carolyn's death led detectives to one person, J.D. Harrington. He had been her roommate. He had been the last known person to see her alive. And, most telling of all, the plastic container had originally belonged to him. When confronted, J.D. denied everything. He insisted he had no idea how the body got there. He claimed he had used that container for storage, but he never put anything inside it. He even suggested that someone else must have placed Carolyn's body inside without his knowledge. But his story didn't add up. Forensic experts examined the duct tape that had sealed the container. At the time of Carolyn's disappearance, DNA testing wasn't advanced enough to pull usable evidence from old, degraded materials. But now forensic technology has caught up. Months of testing finally yielded a breakthrough. DNA had been extracted from the sticky adhesive portion of the duct tape. The results came back. J.D. Harrington could not be excluded. His DNA was there, and that one piece of evidence changed everything. Investigators knew they had their man. J.D.'s DNA being on the tape was more than just suspicious, it was damning. The duct tape had never been removed and reapplied, meaning J.D. was the one who had originally sealed the container. That alone was enough to place him at the center of the crime. Further witness testimony made the case against J.D. even stronger. His former girlfriend came forward with a disturbing revelation. Not long after Carolyn's disappearance, J.D. showed up at her house in tears, completely broken. He had collapsed to his knees, sobbing, confessing that he had killed someone. With this, detectives had what they needed. In 2012, J.D. Harrington was finally arrested and charged with the murder of Carolyn Jansen. During the trial, prosecutors painted a clear picture of what had likely happened. J.D. had been furious over money, specifically the rent. Carolyn had either taken it, or J.D. believed she had. In a fit of rage, he struck her, causing a fatal head injury. Realizing what he had done, he panicked. He stuffed her body into the storage container, sealed it shut with duct tape, and abandoned it on Richard Johnson's patio. And for 3 years it had sat there, hiding the terrible truth. J.D.'s defense tried to poke holes in the case, arguing that there was no direct evidence, witnesses, or recorded confession. But the forensic evidence told a different story. The DNA, the testimony from his ex-girlfriend, and the circumstances surrounding Carolyn's disappearance were too much to ignore. In 2013, J.D. Harrington was convicted of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. For Carolyn's family, justice had finally been served, but it had taken far too long. They had spent more than a decade wondering what had happened to her. Now they had answers, but the answers didn't bring Carolyn back. J.D.'s own family struggled to come to terms with the verdict. Some refused to believe he was guilty, insisting there had to be another explanation. But the truth was in the evidence. And now, J.D. Harrington would spend the next 2.5 decades paying for what he had done. Today, J.D. Harrington is serving his sentence at the Colorado Department of Corrections. The case of Carolyn Jansen serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones capable of the unthinkable. Carolyn had put her faith in the wrong person. In the end, it cost her everything. Justice may have come late for Carolyn Jansen, but for many others the truth remains buried. Cold cases like hers remind us that persistence, forensic advancements, and the dedication of investigators can make all the difference. If you have any information about an unsolved crime, no matter how small, speak up. A single piece of evidence could bring justice to someone who has been forgotten. If you or someone you know is in danger, seek help because no one should disappear without answers. A cold wind swept through Portland, carrying whispers of a crime long buried. It was a city in motion, people rushing to work, children laughing on their way to school, families making plans for the future. But lurking in the shadows was a predator, a man who thrived on fear, a man who walked among them unnoticed. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, 3 young girls, Janet Chaw, Michelle Horst, and Akila Johnson, became victims of brutal sexual assaults. The cases were filed and evidence was collected, but no suspect emerged. Their attacker remained a ghost, moving silently through the streets, leaving no trace except for the trauma he inflicted. And then, in 2001, a tragedy unfolded that would force Portland to confront its most chilling nightmare. 14-year-old Melissa Biddler, a bright and promising student, was found murdered. The same faceless monster had escalated, and now the hunt for him had truly begun. Before they became names in police files, they were daughters, friends, and dreamers. Janet Chaw was a high school freshman with a passion for poetry. She would fill notebooks with her thoughts, crafting lines that spoke of love, hope, and the future. Her parents, Cambodian immigrants, had sacrificed everything to build a new life in America. They believed in education, in hard work, in the idea that their daughter would achieve what they never could. Michelle Horst was a girl full of life, the kind of person who could light up a room with her laughter. She spent her afternoons at the local rec center, challenging boys to basketball games, proving time and time again that she was just as strong, just as fast. She wanted to become a teacher, to inspire the next generation. Carolyn Jansen had a voice that could make people stop in their tracks. She sang in her church choir every Sunday, filling the sanctuary with melodies so beautiful that even those struggling with faith found solace in her voice. Her mother always said she was destined for greatness, that one day she would move beyond Portland and sing for the world. And then there was Melissa Biddler. At 14, she had already mapped out her future with precision. A straight-A student, she loved mathematics and science, always eager to learn. She dreamed of attending college, traveling the world, of making a difference. Her parents adored her, their only child, their pride and joy. None of them knew that a monster had set his sights on them. The attacks came without warning. They were swift, brutal, and left their victims forever scarred. Janet Chaw was walking home from her boyfriend's house on a cold February night when she noticed a man following her. She crossed the street. He did too. Panic set in, but before she could react, he grabbed her from behind and dragged her behind an abandoned garage. He raped her and then disappeared into the darkness, leaving her alone, broken, and terrified. Michelle Horst was 5 blocks from home when she saw him, a tall, broad-shouldered man. She gave him a polite nod, not wanting to seem rude. Then, in an instant, he lunged. She struggled, but he was stronger, pinning her to the ground and violating her. When he was done, he ordered her to count to 100 and vanished into the night. Carolyn Jansen was late for school, rushing to make the first bell when she saw him standing on the corner. He asked for directions. She answered, polite and unsuspecting. Then, suddenly, she was being dragged between 2 houses, choked until she blacked out. When she awoke, he was on top of her. When it was over, she stumbled to school, her vision blurred with tears. Each girl went to the police, each girl was examined, and DNA samples were taken. But without a suspect, the cases were shelved. The memories haunted them. But in the eyes of the law, they were just numbers in a backlog of unsolved cases. Then, on December 13th, 2001, the predator went further than ever before. It was a quiet morning. Melissa left for school early, eager to meet her math teacher before class. She said her goodbyes, slung her backpack over her shoulder, and stepped outside. She never made it. 50 steps from her home, she was attacked, strangled, assaulted, left face down in a backyard, her pants and underwear wrapped around her ankles. A condom wrapper lay nearby, discarded like trash. Her murder sent shockwaves through the city. Unlike the previous cases, this wasn't just an attack. This was a child who had been murdered in cold blood. The police scrambled and the community mourned, and somewhere a killer walked free. Forensic scientists analyzed the DNA from Melissa's crime scene. It matched the DNA from the unsolved rapes. The same man had attacked all 4 girls, a serial predator that had been hiding in plain sight. But he still had no name. Then, at 3:30 a.m. one morning, a desperate woman called 911. A man had broken into her house and attacked her, but this time she saw his face and she knew him. His name was Leighton Stevens. When detectives arrested him, they found a disturbing pattern. His criminal history stretched back 2 decades. He had been preying on women since the 1980s, targeting girls as young as 9. DNA confirmed he was responsible for the rapes of Janet Chaw, Michelle Horst, and Carolyn Jansen. He was also Melissa Biddler's killer. The trial was swift. The evidence was undeniable. The jury delivered its verdict: life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the victims and their families, it was justice, but not closure. Janet Chaw still struggled with the weight of that night. Michelle Horst refused to let fear define her, but the nightmares never left. Carolyn Jansen, once silenced by trauma, now spoke for those who couldn't. Melissa Biddler's parents visited her grave every Sunday, speaking to their daughter and whispering words of love that would never be answered. As for Leighton Stevens, he was sent to the Oregon State Penitentiary, where the walls closed in around him, where time stretched endlessly. He would never walk free again. Portland moved on, but the scars remained. In a locked evidence room, the files of Janet Chaw, Michelle Horst, Carolyn Jansen, and Melissa Biddler were finally marked. Closed. Justice may have been served, but stories like these remind us that countless unsolved cases still exist. If you or someone you know has information about a cold case, don't stay silent. Contact law enforcement, support victim advocacy groups, and help keep our communities safe. Every voice matters, and every detail counts. David Stevens was the kind of man people remembered. Born and raised in Kansas, he was the youngest of 3 siblings, a bright and ambitious man with a natural charm that made him easy to like. He had a passion for cars, often spending hours in his father's garage fixing up old engines, but his dreams went beyond mechanics. He had a sharp mind for business, always eager to climb the professional ladder and make something of himself. After earning his degree, he left his hometown behind for a fresh start in San Diego, California. He was determined to build a career, create a life for himself, and maybe, along the way, find love. San Diego offered him a promising start. He landed a job at a dating service called Perfect Match, where he worked as a supervisor. The irony wasn't lost on his friends. David was great at helping others find companionship, yet his own love life remained complicated. His natural confidence made him a hit with women, but he hadn't settled down. That changed when he met Ninon, an 18-year-old co-worker who caught his attention. She was young, attractive, and seemed drawn to him. The flirtation was light at first, but it wasn't long before they decided to go on their first real date. David had no idea it would be his last. On the night of December 3rd, 1998, David took Nee back to his apartment after dinner. There were signs of intimacy: 2 glasses on the nightstand, one of them with lipstick, and personal items that indicated the night had been more than just conversation. In those quiet, early hours of the morning, he must have thought everything was going well. He had no way of knowing that outside someone was watching. Hours later, a 911 call shattered the silence. A massive explosion rocked La Jolla Scenic Drive. When firefighters arrived, they found a car engulfed in flames. The intense heat had turned the vehicle into a blackened shell, but as the fire was extinguished, something horrifying came into view. Inside the passenger seat was the charred body of a man, burned beyond recognition. The plates on the car led investigators to an address in Pacific Beach, San Diego, the home of David Stevens. Detectives quickly worked to piece together his final moments. His apartment showed clear signs that someone had been with him that night. Strands of long black hair were found in the bathroom. A condom wrapper and personal lubricants were discarded in the trash. Most telling of all were the two sets of fingerprints on the mirrored headboard, one set large, the other smaller, likely a woman's. The evidence painted a clear picture. David had not been alone. Investigators turned to the people who knew him best, and one name kept coming up: Dancers, a strip club he often visited. The employees recognized David immediately. He was a regular, friendly face they had seen many times before. But when detectives started asking about the night of his murder, no one had answers. None of the dancers' fingerprints matched those found in his apartment. For months, leads dried up, and the case stalled. 2 years passed without progress. David's family was left in limbo, unable to mourn properly without knowing who was responsible. Then, in a last-ditch effort, detectives took an unusual approach. During Super Bowl 35 in January 2001, they aired a Crime Stoppers segment featuring David's case, hoping anyone would come forward. It worked. The next day, an anonymous caller reached out to police. A woman at a Super Bowl party had recognized the case and claimed that a friend of hers knew something. The friend? Nee Norn. When detectives tracked Nee down, she initially denied everything, but the more they pressed, the more her story cracked. Finally, she admitted she had been with David that night, but in her version, she was a victim too. She claimed that when she went home after their date, she found her boyfriend, Ron Barker, waiting for her in a jealous rage. To cover up her infidelity, she told Barker that the encounter had not been consensual. That lie would cost David Stevens his life. According to Nye, Barker was furious. Enraged and possessive, he demanded that she lure David into a trap. Fearing his temper, she did as she was told. Under the guise of needing help with a broken-down car, she convinced David to drive her to a remote area. Unaware of the danger he was in, David agreed, never questioning why another car was following them. When they arrived, Barker flashed his headlights, and Nye told David it was her brother coming to assist. David suspected nothing. Barker got into the back seat. Then, without warning, he reached forward and fired 2 shots into David's head. As David's lifeless body slumped forward, Barker and Nye sprang into action. Barker set fire to the car, hoping to destroy any evidence, but the flames got out of control. In the chaos, he suffered burns, an injury he would later struggle to explain. When detectives heard Nye's confession, they asked if she would be willing to call Barker while they recorded the conversation. She agreed. Over the phone, Barker casually admitted to the murder, confirming everything she had told police. He showed no remorse, no hesitation, just cold, matter-of-fact statements about how he had ended a man's life. Both were arrested. Barker, believing he could outsmart the system, insisted on representing himself in court. He claimed his confession had been coerced, that he had been manipulated by the police. But the jury saw through his act. After only 2 hours of deliberation, they found him guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Nye Norn also faced trial, but her case was different. She argued that she had been under Barker's control, that she had been too afraid to stop him. The jury wasn't convinced. She had lured David to his death. She had stood by while Barker pulled the trigger. She had helped cover it up. Like Barker, she was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. For David's family, the verdict brought closure but not peace. His mother, who had spent years waiting for answers, finally had them. But they didn't bring her son back. He had so much more life to live, she said through tears, all because he trusted the wrong person. Nye Norn and Ron Barker were sent to separate correctional facilities, their futures sealed by a crime that had taken years to solve. Barker never expressed remorse. Nye, years later, would claim she had been a victim too, but to the Stevens family, the truth was clear. David had been betrayed, manipulated, and murdered by someone he had trusted. In the end, justice caught up with them both. But for David Stevens, it had come far too late.